Power of the Daleks, the third serial of the fourth season of Doctor Who, first broadcast in 6 parts from the 5th of November to the 10th of December 1966. This is Patrick Troughton's first story, and while I said the 10th planet is kind of a big turning point of the show, this is actually the one that had to prove it could work. And you've just taken out one character that people loved and replaced him with somebody else. Just like, can this work? Well, evidently it did to some extent, because otherwise we wouldn't be talking about Doctor Who today. It wouldn't have gone as far as it did. Now, this story is actually completely missing from the Doctor Who archives. This is the thing, back in the 1960s, they didn't know Doctor Who would grow to be as big as it is, so quite a lot of... They weren't necessarily very careful with the film, and as a result of this, many episodes and stories are actually missing. Now, I have spoken about this before, with the 10th Planet and the Invasion both having missing parts. But this is actually the first story that I've reviewed that is actually completely missing. However, while the footage is completely missing, the audio of it does remain, and they had enough from audio, kind of transcripts and accounts at the time to recreate the episode in animation. Which is actually pretty cool. And to add a little bit of bonus to it, the one I've ended up watching is the updated version that was released in late July of 2020. Kind of updated with kind of new effects, new special edition, the special edition of The Power of the Daleks. So you got the Doctor, played here for the first time by actor Patrick Troughton, or in this case voiced, and his companions Polly Wright, played once again by Annika Wills, and Ben Jackson, played once again by Michael Craze. After escaping from the Cybermen invasion at the end of the 10th planet, they end up on the planet Vulcan, where the Doctor discovers the dead body of an examiner in the Mercury swamps. He assumes the badge of the examiner, and they ultimately get taken to a scientific lab where a group of kind of scientists and people are trying to help a colony. Yeah, simple enough. However, the head scientist, a guy named Lesterson, played by Robert James, he has ended up finding some kind of capsule, and when he opens it up, he finds something that he thinks could help the colony, if he can engineer it. But the Doctor recognises that what the things are inside the capsule are the Daleks. Now, Lesterson believes he can use the Daleks in order to benefit mankind in this colony. And the Daleks appear to actually seemingly be friendly here, like saying that they're here to serve humanity. But the Doctor knows that something's up, and he can't just leave it alone. He can't just let the Daleks be good. Has to find a way to stop them. But as well as that, he also encounters a variety of other characters. As I said, there's Lesterson, who's the kind of head scientist, who we find out later on is possibly not quite all right up there. You got his kind of second in command, a woman named Janley, played by Pamela Ann Davy, who I'm not entirely sure how to describe her. I mean, I think she's kind of like a secondary villain in that she's shown to be working with a resistance and working for a guy named Bragan, played by Bernard Archard, who wants to put the colony under martial law and essentially put himself in charge, while Janley is kind of his second in command and is often shown to be rather tetchy, which I do think is quite nice. And you've also got a man named Quinn, played by Nicholas Hawtrey, who I'm also not entirely sure how to describe him, but he's shown that maybe he's the guy that's causing problems, but then he actually turns out to be a good guy. And I admit the characters in this one are a little hard to explain. They all kind of mould a bit, but I think it was wise in this particular story to use the Daleks, because similar to the way of Tom Baker's regeneration story, Keeper of Truck and Logopolis into Castrovalva, I think it was wise to bring the Daleks back because we had never seen regeneration before. We didn't know, okay, how can this guy prove he's the Doctor? But bringing back the Daleks, a foe that we're already familiar with, it does give us a bit more of an anchor point to go, oh, okay, let's see how this new Doctor deals with the Daleks. And he does so very well. Considering this episode is recreated in animation, I gotta say, I found the animation pretty impressive, especially on the Daleks. I mean, with the human characters, there were occasions where you could clearly tell it was paintings that were animated side-to-side fashion, i.e. they usually move sideways across the screen, and you can pretty much tell they're cartoons. But with the Daleks, they managed to do some pretty cool 3D effects, and there were points in it where I was thinking to myself, okay, this is clearly done traditional hand-drawn or painted animation, and then there were points where I was looking at the Daleks where I was going, that has to be CGI. I mean, I know it's technically all CGI with this, but I have to admit, I found it pretty impressive. The only point that I was pointed out to by a family member that is I guess is kind of true about the Daleks in here is that with the animation, I said that the effects on the Daleks are pretty impressive, but they said they look fairly impressive when the Daleks are on their own. When they're in a scene with humans, there's a little bit of a drawback in that the Daleks move a slightly slower frame rate than the humans do, to which watching it I could kind of see what they meant. But this is also a very important episode, or very important story of Doctor Who, in that it also inspired two things that would later come up in Doctor Who's history later down the line. For example, the 2010 story, Victory of the Daleks, would heavily borrow from this story, with the Daleks appear to be serving humans and switching from I am your servant to I am your soldier for Victory of the Daleks, which is actually pretty cool. And the other thing occurs pretty much right at the beginning of the story, where after having regenerated from William Hartnell into Patrick Troughton, we see a ring fall off his finger onto the TARDIS floor, an image that would later be reused by either Stephen Moffat or Chris Chibnall in Peter Capaldi's final episode, Twice Upon a Time. After he regenerates into Jodie Whittaker, the ring falls from her finger onto the TARDIS floor, which, having watched the two moments, I didn't think that much about the moment when I first saw it in Twice Upon a Time, but watching it show up here, I actually thought, yeah, that's a pretty good callback. Once again, this entire story is actually missing, but how they've recreated an animation is actually pretty decent. It's pretty cool. I mean, this was the story that had to prove that we can switch from one actor to another fairly seamlessly. I mean, I know there's the theme of regeneration and all that, but this had to prove it could work. And evidently it did work, and I actually think it's a pretty good story. I do kind of wish we could have had a moment at the end of The Power of the Daleks similar to what we've had with other future first stories of they get to the end of the story and the companion goes, well, you're not the Doctor that we knew, but you seem to be the Doctor, so you know what, we'll trust you. I do kind of wish they could have had a moment like that. Plus, also, it has been pointed out to me that you can clearly tell this is 60s Doctor Who, in that Polly is constantly getting into trouble, and then it's either the Doctor or sometimes Ben who has to rescue her, and it's like, Doctor Who wouldn't really hit their stride of empowerment until the 70s, but I will admit, watching Polly having to be saved, it is like, yeah, this is early days, isn't it? But, as I said, should you watch Power of the Daleks? I say absolutely. And I say, watch it for yourself, make your own opinions on it, and do we think it was worth it? I personally think it was. Anyway, I've got 3 more stories coming up in the short term, hopefully, and we'll see what happens with those. Anyway, until then, see ya.